that's why I said in the beginning, this has affected my life. But what has affected my life is the fact that I was married to David, and that now all these years later, I realize David probably had something to do with her absence. But that Detective Munden was on him so much, and David kept coming out. He took 2 different times, he said, he took a lie detector test. One time I went to the police station with him, but there was another time before that Detective Munden came and got him and took him to have a lie detector test, and I wasn't there. But I was always grateful that they weren't interrogating me, and I wouldn't have done them any good, because I'm sitting there saying, my husband wouldn't do that. There's no way. I never would have believed it in a million years.
But when he asked you to provide an alibi for him, when he said, if they come and ask you questions, tell him I was here, what did you think at that point?
Well, because I guess I saw him in and out. He was in and out that night and that day. He wasn't gone for any hours and hours that he could have done this.
Well, what about in the middle of the night when you were sleeping?
Did he leave the house at all? And I don't remember. I would love to know if they did ask me questions, but...
Well, I'll let you know what we find.
Had they asked me, I would have said yes. I would have said, yes, he left, but he came back, and he was never gone long enough to perform any kind of... he'd be gone for 3 or 4 hours at a time, but he'd be back, and... You would think if somebody had done all that, they would be acting in some way abnormal. And he was just his normal self. And he sold a lot of weed. So a lot of times, I'm talking pounds of it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times, he would be wheeling and dealing this weed. And that's just what I assumed he was doing.
And the time frame that it would have occurred would have been in the middle of the night. You would have been probably even asleep.
I would have been asleep.
Yeah.
And I know when I went to bed that night, they were there.
Do you remember what time you went to bed?
Oh, no? I don't.
That's all right. It's a long time. Just was curious.
The middle of the night, the wee hours.
Yeah.
And when the detectives started coming around and asking him, right in front of me, where were you, what were you doing, blah, 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 he told him, and he was honest, I guess, with that Detective Munden. At one point, he told him, I heard him tell him, I sell pot. And Munden said, I'm not here for that.
Right, yeah. That's in the notes, too. They didn't care. They wanted to know what happened. And did he seem scared to you? Did he seem like a guilty person? The way he was acting when they kept coming back, did he seem nervous that they kept after him?
No, but looking back, I find it odd that he was, proud of himself.
What do you mean?
Just that he felt like I felt like when they'd leave and they didn't take him with them, I guess, he was, relieved, or he was proud of himself. He had, pride that, they asked me all these questions. I gave them what they wanted to know. I told them the truth. And, Munden came back lots of times. Munden was at our house, I would guess 5 or 6 times. And then I couldn't believe when I got to Georgia, Munden was hot on my trails. And David hadn't even gotten there yet. So I'm sure they wanted to question me before David got there, but They came back after David had gotten there, because apparently they probably knew he was there. He hadn't found me yet, but they knew where he was at, I'm guessing.
No, I think they were tracking him all of 82 and some of 83. They tracked him to Florida, too, when he was working for his father painting. I mean, they were following him for a good 2 years, and that's why I don't understand. It seems as though they had an idea that it's a possibility that the guys did it, but they could never put them at the house. They didn't have they could not positively say. So let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions and then tell you a couple things. Do you know if Laura was selling any drugs by any chance?
No, I didn't. And I didn't know Laura real well, like her personal business or anything like that.
Okay.
I didn't even know that her and Bryce were divorced. I thought they were a couple. So
I see.
I didn't even know that they were divorced. But anyway, Laura was kind of secretive. Like, I just thought I was quiet. I was a quiet person, and I just assumed she was quiet, naive, like I am, like I was. I didn't know.
Yeah.
But I didn't think that I wouldn't have thought Laura was selling any drugs.
Well, they did. They found a bag of pills in her purse. There was other testimony from people that she had been selling, low level, very low level. She wasn't working, but there were small deposits going into her checking account. $40 here, $50 here, and
well, let me ask you this: was that stuff speed?
Yes.
Okay. Well, David would order this. They called it mail order. They got this stuff. It was nothing but caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
And big jugs of this would be delivered. And my guess is she had some of those.
That's what I was thinking.
If she was selling them or not, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's what I think. Bobby Frost told me the same thing, that he would order that stuff, and
Well, they sit around the kitchen table and shoot it up.
Oh God, jeez, that's I can't imagine. I heard that story too. I can't imagine. So what was her and David's relationship like? I mean, how did they get along?
Well, a couple of times I was suspicious, like, why are you so caring and doting over her? And like when she came over to the house and her and Bryce were together, and then Bryce left and she stayed, I just found all that kind of weird, and I wondered if she wasn't attracted to David. I didn't know. I don't know how long they knew each other before that. I don't know what their relationship was about, but I have found out later that David had many relationships with other women when we were married.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. No idea. I feel so stupid. I'm embarrassed.
Oh, don't. Come on. You were so young. Nobody assumes things like that about their, the people that they are in love with, especially that young. You have blinders on. Nobody, I mean, you didn't do anything wrong. You were just being a normal person, not expecting what was going on, because in most circumstances, all that stuff's not going on around you. So you didn't have any reason to think any of that. What about, was he ever physically abusive to you?
Oh, yeah. That's why every time I left him, I had to, because he beat me on a regular basis. And when he started holding a gun to my head like the Russian roulette in front of our kids, I left and went to a spouse abuse shelter for a while. And that's when I got out of Florida. When I finally left Florida and got away from him, he told me, I will find you anywhere you are, and I will cut you up and feed you to alligators, and nobody will ever find you. And when he looked at me and he said that, I believed him.
Well, yeah, I mean, you didn't learn, you said, excuse me, till later, about how he and Akers were possibly going in and not only robbing, but perhaps sexually, attacking people in their homes. Did you know anything about that?
No, I can tell you, like I said, this is a whole bunch of hindsight now that I see this, but people like Rick Rufeisen and my husband now, Tom, they have shared things with me that they knew about Tom back then, and that they thought he was what was known in the newspapers as the Southside Rapist.
Yeah, Rick mentioned that to me, and I had heard, his interview was pretty jarring, and it'll play nearer toward the end of the episodes. But he was pretty enlightening. They were escalating for sure, and that what my goal was hopefully to find out, what went on that night, who was there, and Bobby Frost tells a story, and he told police a story. I don't know if you learned this.
No.
But he told police that David had come to him and said, we want to rob Laura's house, and we want to do it when Laura's there. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that while she's there. That's stupid. She will what are we going to do if she recognizes us? And he said, David said to her, then we'll kill her. And he said, he told police around that time that he believed David Alplanalp and Rick Akers did it, and they had planned to do it that night. So he had been, according to him, invited to go to do this, and he said no. They wanted him because he had a truck, and he was under the impression that they needed a larger car to rob TVs and such, that he had told him he had a lot of TVs. They didn't mention cash. He didn't mention cash. Although, it wouldn't surprise me if they thought Snedeker had a lot of cash, because he did have a lot of cash, and he was kind of the type that kept it in cash places. I don't think there was any there at that night. But who knows if there was some buried somewhere or whatever, or where they got that idea. But the point was that he had told police at the time that David Alplanalp asked him to come with him, not Akers, with him to rob the place. And he said, no, I'm not gonna do it if she's there. And he wanted to do it when she was there. And that is what I further learned from Rick, was that they were escalating to that. It wasn't just now that they were satisfied with robbing when people weren't there. They wanted people to be there. And the reason they wanted people to be there was so they wouldn't be surprised. And so they'd tie people up or whatever. But you're telling me that basically when he confessed to you, his confession was never that I don't want to hurt Laura and I don't want to even do it when she's there. That directly is not the same as what Bobby Frost told police.
That's why I say I don't believe him.
Right.
That's just my opinion, but I believe he was there. I believe he did take part in it, and I believe that he was so remorseful that he killed himself.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think it would have had to have been two people to get her out of there. One person isn't going to be able to get her out of there and get her away in a car, out of the house or whatever. Now, there is some evidence that she could have been outside because she was packing up her car sometime that night late. I think she wanted to get her stuff out of there and move elsewhere, whether that was back to Goshen, where Bryce was or whatever, because she had actually called his mom in the days leading up to it, asking if she could come back there. So that's why what you're saying is that her wanting to get back together with Bryce, and that makes sense to me, because I think she was wanting to, but she could have been outside and they could have grabbed her. But were you ever aware of them having guns?
Oh yeah.
Both of them, David too?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, years later, another friend of mine came to me and said, one time David, when he was being investigated for all this, gave him a suitcase full of guns and asked him to get rid of it.
What? Really? When was this?
His name was Bill Stammer, and he is dead, too.
I was just going to say, he was on my list of people to talk to, and then I found out he was dead, and that's... So did he take the suitcase full of guns from him?
He did.
And what did he do with it? Do you know?
He said that he gave them to his dad, and his dad took them somewhere. And I don't remember any more about that, other than I was shocked when Bill said, yeah, when all that was going on, David brought me a suitcase full of guns. And he had told him to get rid of them.
Do you know if if they told police about that suitcase full of guns?
I don't know. Did they ever interview Bill Stammer? I don't know.
They did. And his father, I believe.
Bill Stammer actually worked with David at the time.
Oh, did he?
Bill Stammer was a family friend of mine. David was always needing a job. And Bill Stammer helped him get a job delivering meat to restaurants.
Okay.
Refrigerated foods to restaurants.
Well, that's interesting. So he's wanting to get rid of a bag of guns right after this murder happens.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear or read in the newspaper about the telephone calls that the Snedegers got the day after?
No, I didn't hear anything about that. I read that yesterday. The next day they got a call that had sexual orientation and Laura crying or sobbing or something.
Well, I spoke to Dave Scott, who was a reporter at the time, and he did a lot of work with Munden on it, and I asked him about that. The day after, they got a call that was someone saying, I'm going to get you, sucker. I'm bound to get you, sucker. It was a male. So the cops put a wire on the phone, and then the day after that, they get another call. They described in the newspaper as something with sexual undertones. What it was, Dave Scott told me, was it sounded like they got it tested, and it sounded like a recording, a tape, and it was a woman having sex. Like sounds of an orgasm, basically. So they sent it in for testing, and they believe, because there were some clicks at the beginning, that it might have been a recording, an audio tape that had been played, or videotape over the phone. They didn't think it was live, that it was Laura live. Would you have been aware of any such tapes that existed, as far as a sex tape or a tape of recording audio or video or anything with that Laura would have had, or Bryce would have had, or anyone would have had access to?
I don't. I know that Bill Stammer told me there were other things in that suitcase, and he told me there were pictures of me, nude pictures of me, which I never took any. I never agreed to do any sex poses or anything in any Polaroid pictures.
Wow.
But I don't know. He didn't mention anything about a recording or. And I knew Bill Stammer well enough to know that if Bill Stammer thought that David had killed somebody, he would have gone to the law. He was a law-abiding citizen.
He was talking to them. I only have the handwritten notes from his interview, and so hopefully I'll get some more clarity with the other ones. But he and his father were talking to police about David, so I think they were, for sure.
Okay.
So did he describe these pictures? I mean, that's horrible, first of all. I'm sorry. That's awful.
No, he just said they were Polaroid pictures of me.
Were you asleep? Obviously, they weren't taken.
And I said they couldn't have been me. I said, because was the person a willing participant? And he said, well, they were pictures. I don't want to embarrass you. And I said, well, I never agreed to any pictures. I've never agreed for somebody to take nude pictures of me. So,
wow.
I don't know. And Bill knew me. He said it was me, but I was never a willing participant of pictures.
Yeah, so that's why I was wondering if he had described you as like you were asleep, or if the cameras were surreptitiously placed somewhere where you wouldn't have known you were being recorded.
Well, this is the thing, and I think Bill was so embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I said, when I asked him, well, what was in this suitcase? And it was more like a briefcase. Okay. He said it was smaller than a suitcase, but it had a lock and, like an old timey briefcase, hardback and all. Mm-hmm. And it had, several pistols and these pictures of me naked. And with the embarrassment that came, we just sort of dropped the subject and didn't say anymore. I didn't want to hear anymore. I didn't want to know anymore. Not having it over the embarrassment of these pictures was, where my mind was going. Like, why would he have all this information destroyed? But I wish I could remember if Bill said what he did. I know he said he gave it to his dad. He got his dad in on it. Bill did. He said, I went to my dad and I said, look, I don't know what to do with this. And I guess his dad took over. Maybe his dad called the police, and that's how they got the, whatever interview you're talking about, that they interviewed Bill's dad.
That is interesting. The gun, obviously it was a bag of stuff that he felt was incriminating. So we've got guns and we've got pictures that he shouldn't have taken that he obviously did. And it makes me wonder if he was responsible for that tape of Laura or not, because if someone's into recording people when they don't know they're being recorded like that, especially in sexual situations, I mean, you said they were Polaroids though, not a video. So it was Polaroids are different.
That's what Bill said. Bill said they were all Polaroid pictures. Like, he was like, don't you you didn't see him taking pictures of you? And I'm like, dude, that was not me. That could not have been me. If this person was coherent, it was not me. So I don't know about that, but
well, that just to me, knowing that there was an audio tape that, and by the way, I asked Dave Scott, I said, well, how, I mean, it said in the paper that her parents and possibly Bryce had ID'd it and thought it was Laura. And obviously, if it was a sexual situation, Bryce would probably be the only one
Right.
that they asked if he would know if that's what she sounds like. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, how did that video or whatever arise? Now you're telling me that you were clearly taking pictures of when you didn't know it. That, makes me wonder what, was going on. And Munden interviewed Bill Stammer in October of 1982. The first thing I can tell you is that in that conversation, there was no mention of this briefcase full of guns and nude pictures that Cindy describes. So if they had been given to Stammer by that point, he kept that information from police. But he may have given the briefcase to his father, like Cindy said, and at some point that information was revealed to police. We don't have any information regarding that either way. But it could have been information that was given later. A few more things from that interview included Stammer saying that he knew Dave Alplanalp was a thief and a bad guy. Stammer said that he had only met Laura once when she came to Alplanalp's house with her daughter. He did verify that he knew that Rick Akers knew Laura. Stammer said that the last time that he'd seen Dave Alplanalp, he'd been beaten, allegedly with a baseball bat, by the owner of a property when Alplanalp was going through their yard. Stammer said that Alplanalp had been worried about taking the polygraph, but later told him that he had passed it with flying colors. He also said that Bryce Morris had come to Alplanalp's house and told him the police were on their way over to talk to him about Laura going missing, and this tends to line up with Munden's notes. Something that occurred in Bryce Morris's conversation with John Munden led him to believe that they were going over to Alplanalp's house. But again, as of yet, we don't have that interview between John Munden and Bryce Morris. Finally, and pretty chillingly, Bill Stammer said that Rick Akers was going to kill Cindy Alplanalp if she breathed even a word to police about he and Alplanalp breaking into houses. I can't help but think that Cindy dodged a pretty scary bullet by being as naive as she was back then. In fact, it's probably what saved her life. So, over the years, did you, from other people, hear stories about what happened that night, literally, or was the only thing you heard from what happened that night was from David himself when he said that they went there, they saw that Laura was there, left, and then Akers went back?
That's the only time, because when I left David and went to Georgia, and then he followed me there, I went from Georgia to Florida to California. I wasn't around these people for many years, and then I came back to this area, and then Rick Rufeisen, the fact that he had contact with a couple of people, he shared with me what he knew. Mm-hmm. And this is another thing. He mentioned a name, Donnie. Yeah, mentioned the name Donnie Lawson or Larson.
There were two Donnies that I know of, a Donnie Thomas and a Donnie Myers.
Okay.
That they lived with Frost at one point in some apartments, and they were also all close with Akers and Alplanalp.
Yeah. And I don't know that I ever met them, but I heard their names mentioned amongst them when they would be together, this Donnie person. Okay. I think Donnie was in on the John Dillinger Museum incident with Rick.
Yes. He was. Donnie Myers.
Yeah.
I found the newspaper articles on that because I did there's an episode about that too, because apparently he was obsessed with Dillinger.
Rick Akers was obsessed with Dillinger.
So what was your experience? I mean, if Akers spent a lot of time at your place, what is your experience of him? What was he like?
You know what? This man was never anything but so kind to me. When we found out I was pregnant, he bought me baby beds. He bought me baby clothes. He bought he was the nicest man.
Wow.
It's just so bizarre to me that people. I was really young and stupid to not see evil people. I just didn't see people as evil, and these were evil, evil people. And I guess my guess is after all these years, I have to figure they needed some innocent people to surround themselves with. I guess. I mean, it has haunted me that would they have used my innocence to, and I'm sure they laughed behind my back like, she's so stupid.
People like that prey on people that they find are more, that they, first of all, they can manipulate and control because they know you're not like them. So you're easily manipulated. Not you, anybody that's normal, have a normal functioning brain that's not like that is there, and you add in, you say, when was David, when did he get those diagnoses? He had schizophrenia, and what was the other one?
Dual identity disorder.
I'm going to have to research that one. When was he diagnosed?
Well, I can't remember what year it was that he went into the Air Force, but he was in the 5th week of a 6-week boot camp. Him and my Uncle Ron went to the Air Force together. My Uncle Ron stayed. David had a mean streak, and he would hit me and stuff. And they didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think nobody ever suspected that David would do anything like that. And then when they started investigating Rick Akers, everybody was like, oh my God, I can't believe Rick did that. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm wondering if my husband wasn't an accomplice.
Yeah, and everyone that I've talked to that connects Rick with it connects David too, because apparently they were doing stuff like this and pulling other people into it. Like one of those Donnies got pulled into a pretty ugly situation that Rick told me about, So I think that people were starting to recognize this darkness that they were starting to escalate, and so certain people like Rick were backing away from that. Like, no, robbing is one thing, doing other kind of things like that is something altogether different, and it did seem like it was escalating. And I'm wondering, did you see signs as far as the mental health issues? I'm sure now as you're older, you've seen things and you've got a better picture of what schizophrenia looks like. Did you see that in your relationship? Did he take medication? Was he,
No, he didn't take any medication, and he was so able to convince everybody, he was, looking back, there was something very wrong with him. He had an anger issue.
Was he paranoid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that age, how old was he when Laura went missing? What are we talking?
He was born in 1961, I think.
So he was only 20. Yeah. See, he was right at the cusp of that age where things like schizophrenia often set in for males. So that makes sense to me that it would be something that you maybe didn't put together back then because the signs were just starting to get, you know what I mean, more noticeable. Like that's the age where a lot of it sets in for men. So that is interesting to me too, and I don't know, how much of it played a part in how he ended up,
Well, I think he was intrigued by Rick Akers. I think Ricky Akers is the one that got David involved in his sickness. But when we moved, I couldn't get away from him. Every time I moved, he came chasing me down.
Was it a control thing? Did he want to?
Oh yeah. And to the point where, he literally told me, "There's nowhere you can go and hide. I will kill you." I mean, I feared for my life, and I trusted his mother. months. I had nowhere to go, and I asked her, "Can you please keep these babies until I can go to Indiana and find somewhere to live?" Every day I wish I had brought them with me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I did not know, and his parents did not know anything about what David was up to.
No, I don't think so either. I think it was just as a shock.
No, they
Obviously,
didn't know.
you're not going to think that of your kid. I mean, Well,
Yeah.
I heard a story. Do you know Kenny Weber?
Kenny Weber.
He said his
as
wife.
As a matter of fact, I think Kenny Weber's. When I moved to Georgia, I think his wife was babysitting for my daughter.
Yes. So he thought it was, he told me, I had asked him because Bobby Frost had said he thought someone, he said he thought that David had left town like the day after Laura went missing. He was always under the assumption that he left town right away and that Kenny Weber had taken him to bus station or airport or whatever. Kenny Weber said, no, that didn't happen. He said, but what I'll tell you did happen is my wife used to babysit for David Alplanalp and his wife's kids. And one day he stopped coming and that same day my car disappeared. And I always assumed that David Alplanalp stole my car.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I said literally the same day. He said, oh yeah, well, I went out to my car one day and it wasn't there. And they never brought the kids to be babysat for me from then on. And they owed us money. And I wondered what year that was. He thought it was around 83, I think, 82, 83. Cause his kid, based on his age, but it didn't. I thought, well, I don't think they were in Indiana during that time. So you're saying that the kids were there, but they were staying with someone else at the time.
I only had one daughter.
Oh, okay.
She was she only watched her for about a week.
Okay.
And then I ran away. I ran off. I hid from him and ran off. I was very afraid of him. And it had nothing to do with the Laura Morris or anything like that. I feared for my own life.
Because all right, okay.
At this point, I didn't think he had anything to do with killing somebody or abducting somebody. She hadn't been found yet, so
right.
At this point, it was still an abduction.
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't think he had anything to do with that, but I knew he was one mean man, and he threatened me, and I was like, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm leaving.
Yep.
And I picked up my kid and I left. And I know that somebody else told me a story that he sold Kenny Weber so that he'd have the money to go to Georgia. He sold Kenny Weber a bunch of stereo equipment. And then Kenny gave him the money and he left town with the money and the stereo equipment. Oh, somebody else told me that years ago.
Jeez. Regarding that stereo equipment being sold by Alplanalp to Kenny Weber, there was some documentation related to that in Munden's notes.
I wasn't familiar with Greenfield or Shelby County in any way. I'd never been there before. Anytime I saw Laura was at our apartment, or anytime I saw Laura and Bryce together, we had gone out to go do something together. But I never was ever in Greenfield or knew anything about Greenfield until Munden came from Greenfield, and he, whatever we learned from him, that, and was that where Laura's mom and dad's house was in Greenfield?
Yes. How far away? I don't know the area. It was your apartment from Greenfield.
Okay, I'd say, I'm terrible with directions and distance.
So am I.
Just knowing now, I could get to Shelby County from Franklin. We lived in just the town north of here, Greenwood. And I'd say it would take about 40 minutes, maybe.
And where was Ricky Akers living at the time she went missing in relation to all this?
I don't know wherever Rick Akers lived, but he sure stayed with us a lot.
Oh, did he? Okay.
He spent a lot of nights at our apartment, but...
Did he stay that night, do you know? The night she went missing, did he stay the night?
I don't know. I do know that he and David were together earlier in the night.
And they
left the house together.
Okay.
But David came back, like I said, within a few hours or within an hour, not a long time. He came back, and then he was there the rest of the night.
So you physically remember him coming back that night?
Yes.
Okay.
And the only reason why I do remember that was because when it was fresh and happening, and I could hear the Detective Munden talking to David and like, where were you here and there? And I knew, I remembered, because it was just a couple of days before that David and Rick left together and David came back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was late at night.
Are you talking late like midnight or late like 2, 3, 4 a.m.?
I really cannot remember that. I just remember it was late at night. Like, it woke me up. When he came home, I had to get up and unlock the door.
Oh, okay. You had to get up and he didn't have a key?
Apparently not, because I remember I had to get up and let him in the door.
So if, for example,
he had a key, but that particular night, I let him in the door. And he left with Rick and came back by himself.
So do you're thinking then, if you think he may have been there and that he lied, that he would have left while you were sleeping then, if he went back out?
Exactly.
Okay.
And also, I think that after he told me this confession thing, that we went there and I said, no, we weren't going to hurt Laura. And then I came home and Rick went back. See, all that kind of clicked. Like, yeah, remember, because I had to let him in.
Right.
And I was pissed off. I was pregnant. I was mad. He's out running the streets, whenever, wherever, whatever. And I was pissed off that I had to even get up out of the bed and open the door.
Yeah, that is strange. If he's got a key, why would you have to get up and open the door?
Well, and looking back, you know, he would shoot up that speed. So he would be real, like, he always walked around like he had anxiety, or, you know, couldn't sit still, real fidgety. And, you know, I just figured he was on that shit.
Yeah. But you don't remember his keys going missing or anything like that then? You just think
I don't remember what?
His keys going missing, his house keys or anything like that?
No, I don't. I don't know how I could even remember that. But, you know, talking about it now, I can remember that I let David in that night, that I was pissed off, and I had to let him in. So that right there would tell me he must not have had his keys. I didn't think anything about it then. But
and
all these things come up, you know, I'm being enlightened as well.
Yeah.
In what went on. And
it's possible when he came back because he didn't have his keys. And if they were going to go back out and he was going to have to get in the house, while you were sleeping, then he would need his key. You only had one entrance that he would have been able to get in. He couldn't have get in.
Only one entrance, because we lived on the second floor, and we had a patio door, but yeah, there was an entrance to the building, and then you went upstairs and our door, you know, then that's where you unlocked the door. The actual apartment building had a door you went in, and then.
Did he ever tell you that he and Akers went prior to this and cased out Laura's house?
No. But I do know that later, and I wish I could remember when I found these things out, or when. It was many years later that people would say, well, we knew this and we knew that. And the fact that I was out of Indiana for so many years, when I came back, people were still remembering it and this and that. But there are some things that I remember very clearly. There are some things that I remember, and I look back and I think, oh, my God, I was not, how could I have been so stupid, kind of thing. And if somebody asked me my personal opinion, my personal opinion is that David Alplanalp and Rick Akers abducted and killed Laura Morris.
And and that's the consensus generally is what happened. And by the way, Laura did see David there in the days leading up to the murder. Winston was staying with her. He had stayed Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and not Saturday night because she went somewhere Saturday. And I think maybe not. And then she had gone over to his house, I believe, right before the airport. So if, for example, they had come to try to rob the place in those days, they would have seen his vehicle because he had a car there, and that would have probably deterred them from going in because there was another vehicle there. The night that she picked up her mom from the airport, when if David and Ricky Akers went there, they wouldn't have seen any. They wouldn't have even known Trudy was there because she just went. But he would have known that because you said that she told them she was going to pick her mom up at the airport. So where did they think they were staying? If they thought the house was going to be empty, where would they think Trudy would be staying?
I don't know.
So
I have no idea.
But their impression was that your recollection is that they didn't know that she was going to be there, or that's what he told you.
What? Yeah. What he told me was they went there to rob the Snedeker house, and when they got there, Laura was there, and David said he wanted no part of it. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that.
Well, he might have. His guilt may stem.
Confess.
Yeah, I agree. And his guilt may stem from, regardless of the sexual assaults he may have committed with Akers in other situations, that may have not been something he wanted to do to Laura. And that is a possibility that did occur in this case, just based on some of the evidence. And so that may be where his guilt comes from, because if nothing was robbed, that, to me, if the house didn't get robbed, it doesn't even appear that they got into the house. So just like the time that she heard something outside and she told Winston, and it was after one of the nights that Winston spent the night, and he left around 2 or 3 a.m. When Winston comes to pick her up, they're driving, they were going to go to a movie or something, and she said to her, she said, last night I heard something outside and I went out and David Alplanalp was outside, and she said, I asked him, what the hell are you doing here? And he said, just out getting some air. And that's as far as the conversation went, because they were at a club and they got a drink or something, and she didn't go any more about it. But he was at the house in the day or two right before, and she had told Winston, who would have didn't know David from anyone. He was a new guy that she just met. So he literally said David Alplanalp, and he said Laura had said, he said, well, what did you do? She said, I went inside and locked the doors. And because I don't trust him, he's known to steal shit. So that's what she told Winston. So he had gone to that place. Plus, Bobby Frost says the same thing, that Alplanalp had asked him to go to that house, and they were gonna rob it while she was there. And he said, if you believe Frost's story, he said, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And I said, that's stupid. We're going to wear masks and stuff, but she's going to recognize her voice. What are you going to do if she recognizes her voice? And he said, we'll kill her. That's what Bobby Frost told police. Now, when I talked to Bobby Frost, he didn't put himself at the scene. He walked that back and said was asked by David to go. He said no, and he believed him and Akers went. It's interesting to me how when he confessed to you, when David confessed to you, and he said Rick went back there and did it. So was he saying he knew that for a fact because Ricky told him he did, or he just assumed it?
Well, I would have liked to have gotten to the bottom of that. I would have liked to have known. I wish I could go back, and it was just all so shocking to me. But Rick had already been, all that had gone down with Rick, and they opened fire on him, and it was a whole another traumatic story. But all I know that he said was that they went there, Laura was home, he wouldn't do it, Rick brought him back, and Rick went back up there. And when I think about it, when I look back, I think he was trying to let this out without incriminating himself.
Mm-hmm.
To me, but I believe he did know. I believe he did take part in it. I believe he just left that part. He lied about that part.
Yeah, I think so too. Just based on the other people that heard about it and knew about it, because if he was asking Frost before Akers was involved in going, he was asking Frost to go first. So it might have been that day that they all knew that Laura was going to pick up her mom. They thought they'd go and she wouldn't be there. Maybe you had said that Laura told you guys she was going some middle of the night to pick up her up the airport.
I knew that she was leaving our house, and we had discussed the fact that she had to pick up her mother from the airport that night. And I can distinctly remember her saying her mom was coming back from Texas, and now I think maybe she was coming back from Florida. But
she was, yeah.
Anyway, she had to pick up her mom from the airport, and it was late at night. And me, being this naive, I'm saying, oh, my God, you're going to drive all the way out to the airport in the dark by yourself? But, that's how I looked at it. I was a very sheltered person, had just been let out, and what do I come upon? These freaks that took me right on in, lured me right in, and I was like, oh, my gosh, it caused me great grief my whole life. And I've often thought of Brandy, like, what happened to that poor girl? And I have a question. Did her father not, I thought she was raised by Bryce.
No, they don't have a good relationship, actually. He wasn't, according to her, wasn't a good father. He also was into drugs, and, he may have also been grief-stricken. His, mother of his child is murdered. He may have, like you, in the back of his mind thought, holy shit, did these guys that I was friendly with do this? Before I go any further, because I want to make sure, that day that they were at your apartment, was Ricky Akers there at the same time that Laura was there?
I've tried to remember that. I know that all in that day, I saw all those people at my apartment. Now, whether they were all there at the same time, I can't promise you.
That's okay. Yeah.
I don't think that Bryce and Rick were there at the same time, but I think that Rick and Laura were. I can't guarantee that, but I feel like there were just people coming and going, which they always did. Because, like I said, David sold lots of pot.
Yeah. Now, even if we're not talking about that specific day, Munden has said that he could not find any direct interaction or correlation between Laura and Rick Akers since they got out of school. That doesn't sound like it's accurate if Rick Akers was was hanging out at your house a lot at that time, and so was Laura. Do you know of other times when they were both there at your house at the same time?
No, I don't think so. I think their only interaction with each other was if she had come over to our house to hang out, and Rick would come and go, kind of thing.
All right.
But no, they didn't. I don't believe they knew each other. They just saw each other in passing when they were both visiting David. Okay,
that makes sense, because that's what it sounds like that Munden thought too. And some of these sort of cross things, so that's probably one of the reasons why maybe Munden was having issues, because he couldn't literally put them at that house that night. He's got statements from the new boyfriend, Winston, saying that she said his name, that he was outside of his house a night or two before. He's got Bobby Frost saying that he's got all these people giving accounts of they were going to do this, they were going to do, but that specific night they may not have been able to firmly plant them there. But it sure as hell is pretty strong circumstantial evidence as far as I'm concerned, and especially with David, later in his life saying that it's possibility, that Rick went back there. Either he believed it or knew it to be a fact. Do you know? So you're saying that it wasn't an OD, it was an actual suicide. Do you know if police came to the apartment when his body was found?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was, he was at some woman's house, and they were having a April Fool's party. And the woman who owned or rented the apartment where he died at, of course, they investigated her, apparently, and she said that they were playing cards, and David was drunk and acting stupid, and she told him to go to bed. He came out, said, "Hey, I think I need to go to the hospital." She told him just to go sleep it off. He went back there and took a bottle of amitriptyline, and that's what the death certificate says. Death by suicide, victim left a note, overdose of amitriptyline. Believe it or not, ironically, he died in the same apartments that we lived in when I ran off and left him with my daughter.
What are the apartments called?
Green Tree Apartments. They still exist.
I have requested records before on suicides that were investigated because when they're not sure they have to do that, and I've actually gotten notes and read them before. It'll just depend on if they've kept it and if they'll let me have it. And it's an awful thing to have to do and to read, and it's not something I would have to share. I would only like to know for sure that there was nothing was said.
Yeah. If you're able to get a hold of that, I don't have any problem with it. But I was told it was public information.
Yes, it is.
That the coroner's office or the coroner's the one that got it or whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, it would be, interesting to me. And, like you said, who else read it? Was anyone else besides did you say your son had read it?
Bill Stammer and my son.
Yeah, I would not contact them. I don't like to, it's not I don't like to dig into things like that with the kids who had no firsthand knowledge and nothing like that. And I'm certainly not going to contact him and ask him about the note. If I can get it through appropriate records means, then I'll get it. If I can't, I can't. But I will probably have Brandy mention it to the detective because he could certainly get it. And just to be sure, it just seems to me like if someone's going to kill themselves and go through the trouble of writing a note and he is guilty of something, he might have written something in there, and it might not be, like I said, right on the nose. It might have a clue or something in there, and we don't know. Now, I have the actual other note that I have read on another case that I worked on was also a suicide, and he was actually also schizophrenic. That note made just no sense. It was just the ramblings of someone who was in the middle of a psychotic episode. So this could be the same thing. We don't know. We have no idea. And it's terribly sad. It's an awful situation to go around. And like I said, I wouldn't, publish it or anything. I'm just curious to make sure that I can just bring it to the detective's just awareness so that he can check it. Because if we're talking about an entirely different police agency, they might not even be aware of it. And that being able to connect those dots. Brandy and I had an interview with an Indiana State Police detective who was able to confirm for her that he did not believe Trudy obviously killed, her mother, which was good for her, Brandy, to hear, because that was another very difficult thing for her growing up all her life, because she had fond memories of the Snedegers because of, obviously, they were good to the grandkids. She loved her grandmother, and believing her whole life that her grandmother killed her mother has been very painful for her. So just getting that information was good, and she just wanted to get as much as she could possibly get to know what happened, and so I'll be able to give her this information, and we'll be able to pass that little bit of information about that note along, also the confession to the detective, just so he's aware, because again, that all happened years later and no one may even be aware of that, that confession, no one may be aware of, because
nobody is aware of that. But I want to say that if you're able to dig up David's death certificate, it specifically says on there that he left a note.
I want to quickly mention that I sent a FOIA request to the Marion County Sheriff's Department related to Dave Alplanalp's death investigation. While most of the 4-page report is redacted, I had asked specifically about a note found at the scene, And there is a line that says, quote, also advised that the victim has threatened suicide in the past. However, there was no threat or note left last night. Now, whether a note exists and it was removed from the scene before police arrived or not, I have no idea. Cindy says that the death certificate actually mentions the note. And I should also add that we only have this 4 pages. It's not a full death investigation. It's basically a printout. So there were likely more documents related to this case. They just may not have been saved for all these years. Well, where are you standing on as far as this interview and whether you're comfortable with me using it for the podcast or not?
I don't have a problem with it. I know it sounds scattered and.
No, you don't. You don't. You're not giving yourself enough credit. You remembered a lot of things, like him having to get up and let him in the house that night. There's nothing scattered about the story you told me. You have been very specific, and what you're telling me goes along with other things that I'm hearing. I mean, and you really don't.
All I want to be is helpful. If I were in Brandy's shoes, I would want to know, and I honest to God believe that Rick Akers and David Alplanalp were what happened to Laura Morris.
Yeah, and you should be comfortable knowing that there are at least 3 other people that I interviewed that will be on the podcast as well who said the same thing. So you're not telling me something and going out there on a limb on something that nobody else has said. In fact, they've told me more because they, were behind the scenes on people that were hearing what they were doing. I mean, the stories that they heard were darker,
yeah, I never heard any of that, and one thing I want Brandy to know when she tries to absorb all this, if I had any idea that my husband was up to anything like that, I would not have sat back and let him commit some kind of crime like that. I did not believe he was capable of that. I didn't believe Rick Akers was capable of it. And I just didn't know that side of them.
And let me tell you, even the guys that were starting at that time to learn what those guys were doing and capable of were having the same issues. It was shocking to them. This was information that even like with Rick and Bobby and all them, you can get this sense that these guys were backing away from them. So it's not just you. I believe that all of those guys, had they had factual information that David and or Rick Akers did any of this, they too would have not sat back and not told. Mm-hmm. Everybody told, I think, what they knew, what they believed. That's a far piece from knowing. And so you can't.
And we were all in our early 20s,
yes,
every one of us.
Exactly. That is a very important point. Everybody was so young. And, you're talking about the murder of someone who, it's so shocking that at first nobody wants to believe it. But then at hindsight, everybody in the months following watching this play out and what they know are piecing things together. But what they know and they believe doesn't get to we have beyond a reasonable doubt. We know what happened. And so I don't fault anybody here. I think everybody that I've talked to police, that you all did your due diligence. They didn't ask you anything, and when they came to you, you talked to them, but you can only do what you know that you can do at that time. Nobody kept anything. I don't think anybody, except David and Rick Akers. But their pre-offense behavior really speaks loudly too. I mean, both of them, Ricky Akers ran. He ran. Yeah. And I don't think really there's a question who at this point. I think the only questions are left is what actually happened. And unfortunately, the only 2 people who could tell us everything that happened that night are not able to do that. So I know.
Well, you asked me about a name. Did you see the story where the night that they shot Rick Akers, they got someone to drive a car? Oh, and Patty Bridges, which was Rick Akers' girlfriend, she was given immunity or whatever they call that when you are given a new identity. Mm-hmm. And I always believed later, after I got all this info, I believed Patty Bridges knew.
She may. I know that there are some notes where police talk to her. I know that she's the one that told them about where that Cindy and Chuck Clare and where they were staying and where he had gotten rid of at least one gun. And I know she was cooperating with police. I don't know how much she knew either. She may be just like you, where she may have put together pieces, but because she wasn't there that night, unless he told one of them or Rick told her what he did. And was he the type that would tell the girl he was seeing what he did? I don't know. I mean,
Well, Patty was with him for a long time. As far as I knew, Patty was his girlfriend for a long time. And other people told me, and I believe David might have been one of those other people that told me that Patty would go with him to rob houses.
Really?
Now, whether that's true or not, it's hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
But David told me, I believe it was David, that Patty was an accomplice at some of these.
Well, she may have. If they gave her immunity, they did that because they thought there was something that they could convict her on, but they were...
Right.
Yeah. But it was, I mean, obviously it wasn't murder. If they thought she murdered someone, they're not going to, So, but who knows? I mean, the problem here is that we don't know if there was anyone else present that night or not with Laura, because there are also situations like what Rick told me about where they got other guys to go with them they were thinking they were going to rob places, and when they got there, basically forcing another guy to rape someone. So, who knows? Who knows if there was anyone else or if it was just those two? It seems to me like it was probably just Akers and Alplanalp. If there were other people involved, you think by this point those people somehow would have risen to the surface as well. But the other thing that's interesting to me is the PI got a story. He said during his questioning, the private investigator that the Snedigers hired, is that he had heard, now I don't know if any of this is true, that Laura was selling, low-level selling, doing some selling, probably those pills, and she was in debt to someone for drugs. They tried to go over there to scare her and got her, he thought there were two people, managed to get her away from the house. At some point, she made a run for it, and they shot at her, and then she was killed there in that cornfield. It does appear she was killed in that cornfield. It does appear, based on her clothing, that was some struggle ensued, because there are damages to her shirt that she was wearing. So what occurred that night is still up for debate, but it does appear that there's some active struggle that happened that night, whether she was trying to get away. They had said something about her jumping a fence in that cornfield. So I think there had to have been two people involved, at least. Now, he had mentioned something about a van. Do you know anyone in that friend circle that owned a van or, a vehicle big like that?
Yeah, David had a van.
David Alplanalp had a van?
Yeah.
At that time?
Mm-hmm.
I thought he didn't have a vehicle.
Well, we drove a little Ford, let's see, what was it? A little Mustang 2.
Mm-hmm.
But he also drove a van because, he painted for his father. He was a painter, so he drove a van full of paint and all that equipment.
What color was the van?
Well, the one that he had at the time was green.
Okay. Well.
And then the one that he drove later, and I don't know how much later, but it was a gray van.
But you're saying that he owned a green van on the night Laura went missing?
I believe he owned that van then, yes. I can't be 100% sure, but back when we lived there and back when I left, he owned a green van, and that was when all that happened. So I would think he had that green van then.
You were saying earlier that you thought that they had taken the Barracuda that night. Do you still think that?
Yeah.
What makes you think they took the Barracuda that night, Ricky?
Well, because when they left, he left with Rick.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's why I always thought his keys were in the house, and that's why he couldn't use them to get in, because he didn't drive. He left with Rick in Rick's car, and Rick was real proud of these Barracudas. He had a few of them. And he had a red one and a white one. And all I can remember was that night they were in one of Rick's Barracudas when they left.
Well, that sort of, it's possible they came back for the van then, because what Bobby Frost told me was that David asked him to do it because he had a truck and they wanted a vehicle that could haul things. They were planning on stealing TVs and stuff, big items. So the Barracuda
would. The van was not in good running. Like, they would be afraid that would break down for sure.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. He drove it around to do his painting and stuff like that, but he had a lot of mechanical trouble with that old van. But
okay.
Yes, he did have a van. And, the apartments, they wouldn't let you just keep vehicles parked there. So his parents lived, David's parents lived in kind of like it was way back in the country. And I believe they kept the van there because he worked for his dad.
And how close were David's folks? Van. How close were David's folks' house to Laura's house?
Not close.
No, not close. Okay.
No.
Hey.
They were in Johnson County.
Okay. Did you ever go to Laura's parents' house? Were you ever there?
Never had been there. Okay. Like I said, the only time I ever went to Greenfield the only time I've ever been there is when I went to the police station one time when David went to give a lie detector test. And I can't remember who it was, whether it was Bryce, but there was somebody else that had a lie detector test the same time David did.
There was a guy named...
Here I am sitting there like, well, of course I know he's going to pass it because he wouldn't do anything like that.
There was a guy named Dave Corbin that they checked. I think he worked for the Snedigers at one point. There was also Bobby Frost had lie detectors, so it could have been, they were bringing a bunch of people in. Yeah.
Did Bryce?
I think Bryce got his. At some point he was set up for one and something happened and he didn't take it. That was another issue. That there were some problems also with the investigation, things that weren't done that should have done, phone records not gotten in time. That was another problem with how this case didn't pan out the way it should have, because Munden in certain instances didn't do things that he should have done or done it quickly enough, and maybe that's because of how the information was filtering in and whatever, but there were things that he did and he didn't handle well. And then you've got, like you said, the Snedigers who were shady already as hell and doing shady things to throw mud on the waters and confuse the situation, like men going missing, the month afterwards. So it was distracting to police. This was a perfect storm of errors and problems, and that's why Laura really...
Well, there was so much going on at so many different angles of Laura's life. It's like...
Yes.
It just is amazing to me, but I can see how Munden would have dropped all this and started looking at the Snedeker's business, because there's some really shady shit that went on with the Snedekers. And I never had any idea what Laura's family life was like. We hadn't been like girlfriends forever. I knew her for a matter of a couple of months. I was around her several times within that couple of months. And like I said, I thought she was married to Bryce. I didn't even know they were divorced.
Well, that is interesting to show their relationship. Were you aware that David had helped her move from her apartment over to where she was staying at the Snedigers?
No, I didn't know that.
See, she was storing her stuff in that garage, and Bobby Frost had said that he believed that David had actually been in that house before. So he was familiar with the layout and familiar with the house itself and knew that they had a bunch of, like TVs in every room and stuff. He was familiar with it. But I think he also thought that you guys had been over there hung around the pool. There was a pool too. And that doesn't seem to be, so Bobby Frost's stories have some inconsistencies too. Now,
Bobby Frost was a real drug addict back in the more time I saw Bobby Frost sitting in a chair drooling more than I saw him up and walking around.
I've heard some similar stories, and Rick was surprised that Bobby even did an interview with me. He was one of the first. Yeah. And he did. He went on record. You'll hear him on the podcast. You're going to hear all these interviews, and you'll be able to make up your own, it's already started. The first 3 episodes are out now, and then one a week will come out. There'll be like 15 episodes or so. But, and if you're okay with it, I'll add yours to the end. I would edit it down shorter because we've talked longer and there's more, I don't have to put every single bit of this, but if you're okay with it, the stuff that the confession is certainly important to me.
Yes, definitely. I am okay with it. I think I talked to my husband and my daughter, and they're like, we don't want you to get in any trouble. Well, I haven't done anything.
Why were they? Do you know what their concern was?
I think just the fact that I was married to that man. How could I not know?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's no legal trouble you would ever be in. There's nothing. There is no. This case is never going to go to trial. The people that did it are dead. There's nothing that will happen as far as that.
And, nothing makes me more sick than nothing would have helped me more than for them to have figured this out and gotten him out of my life, and I would have my kids, and things would have been a lot better for me. But I'm being married to that man, and that's not the only thing that's come back that he's done. In the process of hearing all this, I've heard all these things that he did. And you mentioned earlier that when he was in Georgia and he was a security guard, they interviewed some Barb. Her name, you said it started with a B.
I think, Brand.
There was a Barb friend, and she got him involved in a cocaine ring, and David ended up in jail in Cobb County, Georgia.
Jeez.
Over that. And I met her, and when David went to jail, and she put up his bond, and then she revoked his bond, and then David was in nothing but trouble. And he flew under the radar his whole flipping life. And I hate that he took himself out and didn't have to pay for anything he did to people.
Yeah.
That will haunt me forever.
I want to thank you guys again for listening. If there are any updates on this case or any of the other cases that I've covered, I'll make sure you're up to speed. And when we get the rest of the documents related to this case, I'll continue to do bonus updates as the information filters in. Thanks, guys.